Hey everybody. Take a little bit of time to discuss today this new book that came out. This one right here, First 50 Years of Dungeons and Dragons. I've been reading through it a little bit because I just got it in the mail the other day. And wanted to some things about it kind of hit me. And there's a lot of online discussion about the new edition that's coming out. I started playing when that one was all the rage, and I do have this one. There's a lot of edition wars that go on. There's a lot of rules lawyers, a lot of people who talk about canon versus not canon and everything else. So I wanted to go through this book because there's some things in it that I think are very good points, and some things in it that I think are a little bit different than the way I would look at it. And I think also there's a lot of other books out on the market that talk about the history of Dungeons and Dragons and role playing, and all of which tend to paint a very different picture from one another. So I've gotten part of the way through it, and I wanted to kind of do this in pieces. Otherwise, this video will be 3 hours long. But the stuff that I think where people get it wrong, I'm either going to discuss in future videos or I have discussed in others. For instance, there's a video on my channel called Gygax v. Arneson, who was right and who did what. And I think that kind of at least discusses the way I looked at some of the discussions that go on around who did what. But this book asks some interesting questions in that the first thing it comes out the gate and says, "Are we in the golden age of Dungeons and Dragons?" It's been around for 50 years. There's probably more people playing it today than there've ever been, at least from a raw numbers perspective. And why is that, right? And it asks a bunch of questions about why that is. And one of the things that does come out sort of right out the gate and smack you across the face with, which I think is exactly right. The game has evolved over time, as games tend to do. Okay, think about that for a minute. It's 50 years old, right? It's been around since 1974. Games are different now than they were then. Correctly or incorrectly, they are different. Let's not even look 50 years. Let's look back in the 80s, right? Through today. There used to be a very popular series of video games called Zork. It was a text adventure. You type your commands to the computer. The computer would tell you what your character was doing. Sometimes you live, sometimes you wouldn't. The Oregon Trail, oftentimes you would type commands, your character would die of dysentery. All these games are out there. Those games, while still showing up online and being played by people for free, if you tried to build that and sell that as a company today, you would find zero audience for that. You might sell six or seven to people like me who kind of were like, oh, nostalgia for a text-based game. But by and large, you're going to sell effectively none. I mean, absolute zero, nothing. So games have evolved, video games have evolved, board games have evolved. RPGs, would make, if you don't evolve, you're pretty much gonna fall by the wayside. Yes, there are first edition players out there. I prefer that one because I understand it. This one I can kind of fake my way through. I do play with the kids on occasion. They like this one better for a lot of different reasons, and it is what it is. Just people change over time. But the hard truth of it is the game has evolved, and that's just sort of the natural process of part of the way life is. Cars have evolved, airplanes have evolved. There's no reason games wouldn't evolve because people are different. And one of the ways it has evolved is you've got VTTs, you got online play, you've got interactive battle maps that you never used to have. Yes, you can still do a battle map on your table, but you can also have an interactive map, which is kind of cool. You can do all these nice things that actually enhance your game. And everybody's saying, yeah, but it's not the way Gary Gygax or Dave Arneson designed it. I guarantee you, if Gygax was alive today and still running this thing, he would be one of the first people trying to figure out how to make everything part of the experience digital, because it's just kind of cooler. And he was always sort of a guy who really wanted to do that kind of stuff. He had advertisements early on for people that knew how to code to come work for the company to kind of build video game versions. So I find it very implausible that if he were running the show today, he wouldn't have some kind of a VTT that he was at least working on. Now the thing that why did this stuff come up in the first place? Why were RPGs ever a thing? At the time, Gygax and Arneson loved to play war games. So war games were things like Avalon Hill put them out. So did a bunch of others. But they found the game experience very limiting. And what do you mean by that, right? Well, so there's not a lot of what you could, not a lot of variation you can get from play to play. So if I'm playing old war games that Avalon Hill put out, like 1776 or Rise and Decline of the Third Reich, I'm basically taking a historic battle and I'm recreating it on a battle map on a table on a board game top with figures for infantry and tanks and ships and everything, airplanes and everything else. and recreating those battles. And there's only so many different variations of that you can do and have it come out. Otherwise, the games kind of all become the same after a while. And oftentimes those games become very unbalanced because you're recreating something that actually happened. And if you look at 1776, it's about the American Revolution. You know, the Americans were kind of outgunned, right? So if you look at Rise and Decline of the Third Reich, it's all about World War II. And until the Americans showed up, Germany was, kind of outgunning everybody. So it's very imbalanced in a lot of ways and didn't lend itself to a lot of creativity. And they wanted a game that had a little more creativity to it. And this is what they came up with, an older version than that were stapled together. And I don't have that edition, so I can't put it up. But the reason they did that was they wanted something that had more of a storytelling component. They wanted something that would allow you to be more creative. They wanted something that had infinite possibilities, and those infinite possibilities just didn't exist on the board games of the time. So they're like, okay, fine, we're going to go fix that, right? We'll come up with something new. And they came up with this. And they came up with a system that has, dungeon masters, player characters, non-player characters, game scenarios, but there's really no limit. I mean, the limit is the imagination of the players and the dungeon master, right? And who hasn't played, if you've played for a while, you've always played with a dungeon master who had some idea of how the game was going to go, and the players go a completely different way, right? Or like last week, I was playing in a game, and my party wanted to do one thing. I felt we were walking into a trap. Sure enough, we walked into a trap. My character was killed. So I get to roll up a new character. It happens. But those sorts of things do occur on occasion in this game, and it's a different gameplay every time. It's kind of cool. And that, I think, enhanced a lot of that playability and that replayability and that fascination that just kind of pulls people in. And the other thing it does is speaking as a former academic, and whatever it is I do for a living these days, it really does get you a chance to exercise the creative centers of your brain, and that's something we don't do as often as we should. And speaking as someone who works in a creative field, people, can be creative, but you can also lose the ability to do that. And people will come at you and say, "Oh no, not everybody's creative." Most kids are, right? But somewhere they lose that because they stop exercising that part of their brain, or we tell them to stop it, But we can actually, there are many studies out there that show that if you exercise the creative centers of your brain, you will get more creative. It just happens. And I find this game a great way to do that. It doesn't work for everybody, but it works for me. The other thing this chapter brings up is the game is experiencing a resurgence in the number of people playing it. And more people are playing today, numbers wise, than have ever played inside the role playing game community, and D&D in particular. And why is that? And the authors do kind of cite COVID. Well, a lot of old players got into replaying again because COVID. They were trapped at home. Virtual tabletops are now out there, so a lot of people reconnected, started to play. And I think they're right about that from people like in my age bracket who remember playing the game fondly from when we were kids. But my kids also started playing, right? My kids are in their teens. I've got a 14-year-old, 13-year-old, 11-year-old, and they didn't give a shit that dad was playing the game at all. They could not have possibly cared less until they saw Stranger Things. And I think Stranger Things really threw D&D and RPGs a lifeline at the younger audience. Now, would the younger audience look inside this book and be like, yay, I want to play that? Or would they look inside this book, which arguably has much different, more modernized ways of presenting things than this one did, and say, yes, I want to play that? And, I prefer this one. My kids prefer this one. I think it's an age thing when you look at some of this stuff. And I think a lot of people that are very vocal in the online community that say, "Oh, I'm not buying the new edition. I can't believe they're doing a new edition. Just re-release that one." Okay, great. That serves people who are in their 50s, but I've already got a lifetime supply of games if we're just talking about for me. And if the game is going to survive and Wizards of the Coast is going to have a future 100, 150 years from now, if the game is going to survive that long, it's going to have to evolve again, and there's going to have to be new releases. There's going to have to be new additions, and you're going to have to do that in a way that entices people who don't currently play, who are younger, who look at the world differently than I did in 1984, like everybody does, and say, okay, yes, I want to play that. I want to pull that off the shelf. I want to do that. And this version, I don't think would grab that younger audience today. I just don't think it would. I've even tried to get my kids who play this version to look at this one, and they kind of don't care that much. I know it's a very small sample set. I've only got 3 kids, but they're friends also, and I suspect my kids are not that unusual from other kids around the country. So I'm happy to discuss that with anything, but anybody. But the other thing this chapter brings up, at least in the first chapter, that says the book is going to tell us, is a few things I didn't really expect him to get into, but as I dive deeper into the book, I'm going to reserve judgment until we get there. They claim that they're going to discuss how uh, Dungeons and Dragons is being used by people in the LGBTQ community to explore and experiment with identity. I hadn't really thought about that, but anybody who comes up and says the game is not inclusive, but then also in the same sentence says yes, but it's being used by people to explore identity. Yeah, that's kind of just weird to me, right? So, um, I never thought anybody would use it to explore their identity. I can see where that would be a thing. And if somebody's using it for that and it helps them figure out their life, hey, more power to you. I'm welcome aboard, play, right? It doesn't bother me at all. I'll find a group for you if you're looking for one. If you want to join in one of mine. They also claim they will show this was kind of confusing to me. And I'll reserve judgment until we get there. But the book also claims it's going to show how the game promotes using violence to solve problems instead of trying to find peaceful solutions. Okay. We'll see. I'm not sure I buy off on that because I have never in my once wanted to walk into a dungeon and poke a dragon and try to fight it out. I'm exaggerating. I know there's a lot more to it than that, but I'll reserve judgment till we get later in the book. They also claim that the game can help you process trauma, and there's an academic chapter in it that kind of explains that. And I find that interesting as someone who is an Army veteran and knows a bunch of them, that it can help people process trauma. I hadn't really thought about it. The gameplay is different for everybody, and maybe that's the case. Maybe I'm not seeing it yet, but I'll wait till we get to that chapter to really discuss it further because I want to see what they have to say. But they do ask the question right up front, and again at the end of the chapter: is it the golden age of Dungeons and Dragons? I don't know. Are more people playing? Sure. Does that mean maybe fewer people will be playing 20 years from now? Maybe more people will be playing. Maybe 100 years from now, it'll be an even bigger game. Who knows what the future brings? But that's an interesting pile of stuff that they promise to walk us through. So some of it's going to make my head want to explode because I'm going to look at it and go, how the hell did they get there? But I'll reserve judgment until that happens. So it's an interesting book so far, as are all the other books that are centered around the topic and the documentary films that are out there and whatever else. But um, personally, I'm going to go through and spend some time the rest of this year trying to sort out fact from fiction of what the stuff that is out there says, ooh, this is what definitely what happened versus, what might have actually occurred. And if you haven't seen it yet, there is another video on my channel about the Gygax and Arneson debate about who really invented what and did one person steal it from another. Take a look at that video. If you haven't followed me yet, click like, subscribe, follow wherever channel you see me on, whether it's, on one social media platform or another. And if you want to discuss this topic in a video and be on the channel, drop me a line, let me know. Going to be a lot of fun.